Okay, so in order to set up our enemy spawning, what we're going to do is we're going to create several positions that are above the map, and these are going to represent our spawn locations. So I'm just going to create several spheres that are just going to be located off map. Their size doesn't really matter that much. I'm just going to create them so that they're out of view of the player. And I might as well just resize them so that they're not so large. Eventually we'll be, of course, deleting the mesh renderer on them, so what they actually look like isn't really consequential. So something like that. These are all going to represent our spawn points. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to create an empty game object. Where it resides doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to call this my enemy spawner. And I'm going to attach that to this new empty game object. So this will also just be called my enemy spawner. And so I'll just take my enemy spawner script, and we're going to create, once again, an array of type game object. This is just going to be our enemy spawn points. And so now what I'm going to do is just going to drag and drop each one of these here. So let me just take our, just starting from the top, so to speak, sphere 1 and 2 until all of them are in place. Okay. Now we're just going to open up our enemy spawner, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a variable that I'm just going to call spawn delay. So the smaller this number, the more frequently these enemies will be spawning. And so on update, I'm just going to keep a timer going. So I'm just going to say public float timer equals 0.0f, and instead of update, we'll just say if, or rather, timer plus equals time.delta time. If timer is greater than, there we go, greater than or equal to spawn delay, then we're going to simply instantiate, and this is where we need to provide an actual prefab. So public game object enemy prefab. So we're going to be instantiating enemy prefab at now here's where we're going to have to do some work to figure out where we're going to want to spawn our to actually spawn our enemy. But for now I'm just going to instantiate it at the position of the enemy spawner. So not at we're basically not going to be using the enemy spawn points just yet. So enemy prefab, I'll say transform dot position. Wow. My IntelliSense is being really horrible. Transform dot position, transform dot rotation. Then we're going to reset the timer, so we're going to say timer equals 0.0f. So here's our enemy spawner. Here is our enemy, which I should rename to enemy and make a prefab of. So now in the game object, or so rather the enemy spawner, I'm going to drag and drop the enemy prefab, but not the one from the scene. Don't use this one. You always want to associate prefab, anything that you're planning on instantiating, you want those to be existing prefabs that already exist inside of your project view. So let me go to my enemy spawner and drag and drop the enemy prefab as the enemy prefab and I'll go ahead and press play. And so you can see that our enemy spawner is indeed working. So it is spawning enemies, which is good. So now I'm going to go ahead and create a C# script. This is just going to be my enemy script. So this enemy script is just going to very basically have our enemies just move down. So once again, I'm going to be providing it with a speed. So public float speed equals 2.0f. And on update, we'll just say transform.translate vector3.down times time.delta time times speed. We'll attach that script to our enemies, and go ahead and press play. And our enemies should now spawn in and then move down the screen. Now, our enemies also kind of move with the player, and the reason for that is that when we duplicated our player, we never got rid of the weapon controller. So I'm just going to select the enemy prefab and remove the weapon or the player controller, and so now they'll move just by themselves. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the enemies spawn in a random location. So we're going to have them randomly select one of these spawn points. So the way that we're going to do that is when we are actually ready to spawn, we're going to generate a random number. This random number is going to be basically going to be anywhere from 0 and the maximum possible size of the or the maximum index size of this collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a random number. So I'm going to make an integer, and this is just going to be a random number equals random.range, and I want the range to be from 0, so between 0 and enemy spawn points dot length, which is the size of that collection. This is basically going to give me a number between 0 and 1 less than the size of the array, which is basically going to give us any number that is a valid index, a valid element number. So if you look at the enemy spawner, each one of these numbers is a valid index. So the size of this collection is 9, meaning that the valid indices of it range from 0 to 8. So coming back here, we're going to go ahead and generate a random number, and then what I'm going to do is instantiate an enemy at the transform.position of the enemy spawn points at index random number dot transform dot position. And what this is basically doing is it's referencing one of the random one of the spawn points that exists inside of this collection. So let's go ahead and try this now. I'll go ahead and press play. So now we should see that we're able to spawn enemies. Our enemies should spawn in at random at any one of these spawn points that we've just created. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a shield for the player. This is not only going to be an aesthetic thing, but it's also going to be used to help keep track of whether or not the player should be taking any sort of damage. So I'm going to go back into my player controller, but first I'm going to go ahead and just double click on the player and create a sphere at that location. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new material, and this is just going to be my shield material. And basically this is just going to look kind of like some sort of energy shield that's following the player around. So with this shield, I'm just going to transform it from an opaque to a transparent shader. And I'm going to modify its color, so I'm going to reduce its opacity, so making it a lower alpha value. And I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the shield onto that image, onto the actual sphere that I created. I'm just going to go ahead and scale this up just a little bit. And I might even choose to make it a little bit flatter, depending on how I think it should look. I also might want to modify it so that it's a little bit colored kind of like a green or something like that. and maybe even a little bit more on the transparency. Maybe something like that. And so I'm just going to name this object shield. This is just going to be the aesthetic part of our shield. And I'm going to take that shield and I'm going to make it a child of the player. I'm going to go ahead and select my player controller. I'm going to create a public game object reference to the shield. And I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop that shield reference. On start, I'm going to make it so that the shield is not active. So I'm going to say shield.setActive to false. And if input.getKeyDown, and we're going to just do left shift. So this will be like a special ability. In the event that they press the left shift, I'm going to say shield.setActive to true. And if input.getKeyUp, keycode.left shift, so this is after they lift up their finger off of the key, we're going to go ahead and disable that shield. So we're going to say shield.setActive to false. So I'm going to press play. And oops, looks like I attached the wrong thing as the might have attached the wrong thing as shield. Let me double check. Yeah, I did. Let me go ahead and attach our shield instead of that incorrect sphere like that. Alright, so go and press play. Cool, there we go. I hold down shift, I have shield, and I let go of shift and I don't have shield anymore. And what I should do is just add a complementary variable to that, just so that I know when I'm using my shield and when I'm not. So is using shield equals false at start. And then in the event that I am pressing down the key, I'm going to say is using shield equals true. And then in the event that I'm not, I'm just going to say is using shield equals false. So then what I can do now is in the event that I'm taking damage, so if I were to implement something like void on collision enter, collision other, one of the things that I can do is evaluate whether or not I'm using my shield. So I can just say if is using shield equals true, then I might not be taking damage. But in the event that I'm not, then maybe I should be taking damage. Now, all of the aspects that are involved with completing this project dip into areas that we're already familiar with. We already know how to detect collision. We already know how to apply damage to things. We know how to get scripts to communicate with one another. So what these videos do is they ultimately act as laying out the groundwork for establishing new concepts so that you're able to then go and apply them towards what you might consider to be a much more completed and well-formed game example.